any other person who has joined from KENCHIC, I would have introduced, but maybe as we go on, some of my colleagues will join in. So basically, what is early chick mortality? It is an abnormal chick death occurring between 0 and 10 days. Wakati kifaranga ni mchanga. You have just placed your chicks and you realize that you have a mortality that is not normal. So for example, you have around 200 birds placed, whether they are broilers, whether they are layers, or they are your very nice improved kienyeji birds, Kenbro as KENCHIC supplies, and you have realized that out of the 200, probably you're losing 2, 3, 4, a progressive mortality, then that is an abnormal chick mortality. So we normally say that your chick mortality for the first 7 days, when it is normal, it should range at about, the highest should be around 1.5%. If you go anything above 1.5% na umefikia 2% heading to 3%, then there is a reason to question what is causing the mortality. Some of the causes of the ECM will be vaccinations, especially now that in the recent times, most hatcheries, not only in Kenya, but worldwide, we are having adoption of new technologies that are conforming to animal welfare, increasing vaccination success, and these are the hatchery vaccinations. So probably wengine wanaweza jiuliza, how comes a vaccination would be a cause of chick mortality? It is because some chicks have delivered to your farm pre-vaccinated. So immediately they are hatched, kifaranga anachanjwa, anapakejiwa kwenye box, transported and taken to your farm to begin its life. So the other thing is transportation, brooding, nutrition, and a few management gaps, as tutaendelea kuona as we continue with our presentation. So the first cause of early chick mortality was vaccination, and mostly the vaccination procedure of a day-old chick. So proper handling of the day-old chicks during vaccination is critical to avoid ECM. Because if you handle your chicks aggressively, probably they'll be stressed, utawafinya, you will create injuries, and the chicks that will be delivered to your farm definitely watakuwa wako na shida. A company like KENCHIC usually hires and trains. Actually, it is not hiring, employs and trains progressively, as well as doing numerous assessments on showing the guys at the hatchery on how to do the day-old vaccinations. Thus, we can guarantee you that chicks delivered from KENCHIC have been vaccinated by a qualified personnel, na huyo kifaranga was handled appropriately to avoid bringing issues into the farm. Also, the vaccination mechanisms, it is usually not done manually, but you also use specialized machines, because remember, at the hatchery, you're handling kifaranga wengi, maybe thousands, millions of chicks. So normally they use a fine spray and injections that are very safe for the bird. Second reason would be transportation. And when it comes to transportation, first thing that should be noted is the vehicles, the trucks that are being used to transport the birds to your collection points are usually properly or well air conditioned, as well as well sanitized. The vehicles are disinfected to avoid transmission of microorganisms or disease causing germs to your birds. The packaging boxes are also well ventilated. You also find the boxes have paper cuttings, at least to improve comfortability for the bird ule wakati ambao yako waiting to arrive at your farm, basically during transport. So we also strive to have a well transport system that will reduce the incidences of chicks dehydrating over long distances, because definitely when you're delivering chicks, you will have factors that you cannot control, adverse weather conditions. Sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's too hot, the distance is long. But there are trends that are coming up in developing countries, where you find countries like USA, some countries in Europe, they use nutrient gels or even watermelon, yeah, to avoid your chicks dehydrating. That is a cause of early chick mortality. So that is a trend in developed countries. Kenya tutafikia hapo, but currently at least we are doing good when it comes to transportation of chicks to your farms. Another thing that causes ECM is brooding management. This is directly attached to you as the entrepreneur, you as the farmer. What do you need to do to avoid uh, early chick mortality for your birds? First thing is ensure that your brooder unit is well disinfected. The hygiene is good, was prepared earlier before your chicks arrived. Now, this is why you handle, you do your preheating to bring your floor temperature, your air temperature to an acceptable level to the bird. Ensure that you have good cuttings that are protecting your birds from adverse weather conditions. That is a draft air coming in from the sides, as well as promoting air circulation, kwa sababu yule kifaranga hahitaji joto peke yake, the 33 degrees that we talk about for the first week. Pia anahitaji good air circulation. That chick needs oxygen. Ukimfungia sana, air quality is poor, humidity iko juu, so these birds ends up having respiratory distress, sometimes suffocation, very poor growth, and definitely if the development is poor, the bird is not converting, early chick mortality comes in. Litter management, the type of litter that you've used and the coverage. So are you using wood shavings? Are you using sawdust? So the best material is the wood shavings. Have it evenly covered on the floor surface with a depth of around 3 to 4 inches will be good. Always remember to preheat before your chicks arrive. That is very important, because if the floor temperature is say around 25 degrees, the chick has come at a temperature of around 40. It means this bird will be losing a lot of its core temperature to the floor. So you need to preheat so that you can bring your floor temperature to a level acceptable to the bird, probably around 30, so that the bird does not lose its core temperature to the floor. That avoids chilling. Have temperature set points, various set points for temperature. Maybe you need to have thermometers, but also check at the behavior of your birds. This Dan had discussed earlier on how to check the behavior of the birds to note whether you're overheating, whether your temperature is low, and also to basically observing the chick behavior. So also ensure that you have clean water and that the feed is available. So a clean environment is best for a chick. Remember humidity, temperature, that is the air temperature, the floor temperature, should be, and the air quality should be acceptable to the chick, so that at least the chick can acclimatize as early as the first 24 hours in your farm, so that at least the bird can have a good takeoff. Chick nutrition. So nutrition is very important because it is nutrition that drives growth for your birds. Stuffed chicks are ready to eat anything. Kifaranga akiletwa kwa shamba and you had not done your pre-brooding, kifaranga amekuja na stress, ako na njaa, probably the transport condition was dehydrating, atakuja akipata your drinkers are not well set, kuna baridi na kona njaa, the bird will feed on anything including the wood shavings. So this will be a cause of chicks dying because of the birds cannot digest the wood shavings, and the bird usually has what we call a yolk sac. So it uses the yolk sac during transportation as a source of food, but the yolk sac remains for just a few hours. So huyu kifaranga wetu anahitaji another supplemental source of energy immediately akifika kwa shamba, which you as the entrepreneur, you as the agripreneur should provide, and the bird should find an optimum condition so that the bird can be able to find the feed and the water mapema before depleting the yolk reserves. So early feed intake usually replenishes protein needs of a bird. We all know the building blocks of life, the proteins, the carbohydrates, the lipids. Yeah. So functions of proteins was to repair as well as to build up the body tissues. So huyu kifaranga anahitaji this protein that is in the feed so that it can replenish the energy lost during transportation. Also remember, kifaranga amekuja amepata the temperature is very high at around 33. So you need this bird accessing a lot of water. You need this bird accessing feed so that it does not continue drop in weight, anaendelea kuongeza uzito. Faster water intake supports body processes. Basically, during the first 5 days, the body processes of the chick are poorly developed. For example, the bird will poorly digest proteins during the first few days of life because, to digest a protein, you need enzymes. These enzymes, kuku bado hajatengeneza. So these birds, and to digest a protein, you need a lot of water. So it is very important for your bird to be able to access water as early as possible so that it can be able to at least digest these particular proteins, which are the building blocks of life for this particular bird, coupled with the carbohydrates and the lipids. A few management gaps could also lead to a very high chick mortality. Remember, hungry chicks will feed on anything, and they might also feed incorrectly because probably you have inadequate and poorly arranged drinkers and feeders. You might have inadequate chick paper coverage in the brooder or gunny bags, a poor spacing in the brooder, and incorrect temperature ranges. So probably the temperature is sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low, affecting the normal behavior of the bird. Probably the brooder is too large, the brooder is too small, there's a lot of congestion. You need at least around 65% of the floor space should be covered by either feed or water during the first few days of life for the birds, maybe 5 to 7 days. You might have adequate feeders and adequate drinkers, but they are not properly arranged. So thus, feed and water is not easily reached by the birds. So there is an issue of reaching feed and water by the birds, which could lead to starvation, birds feeding on anything, the wood shavings, the wood cuttings. And this is why the first report you receive when a client is complaining of an early chick mortality is kifaranga wangu wako tu wanakaa tu wadhaifu, hawajachangamka, what we call unthriftiness, and definitely dehydration, which leads to death. So having adequate equipment, this what we call a poverty in plenty. Yeah, there is poverty in your brooder, but at the same time you have plenty of equipment, simply because they have not been arranged in a proper manner. Ideally, kifaranga wako hafai kutembea ama kutafuta maji in more than a meter. Hafai kutafuta chakula na maji in more than a meter distance. So always remember the first few days of life, 65% of your floor space is covered by feed and water. A drinker per 50 chicks. Spread your paper, spread your gunny bag so that your birds can access feed easily. Cover the wood shavings with some gunny bag. Na kifaranga wako they will kick off very nicely. Some few chick management tips. Always remember to use proper litter material. Spread it uniformly on the floor. And always remember that hungry chicks cannot distinguish the difference between wood shavings and feed. So they will always go after whatever the material the chick reaches first. Hiyo ndo kwanza atajaribu kureplenish njaa yake nayo. So that is why you want at least 65% of the floor coverage covered in feed or water. You can always introduce adequate electrolytes in clean water, use of supplement like Vigocin, which has some very good nutritional benefits for the bird. You can use water sanitizers to reduce pathogens load and promote digestion. This is in case of use of acidifiers like Celco pH and agrocid. Regularly clean the drinkers and provide the fresh feed often. Maybe during the first few days, you can be replenishing the feed after every 4-5 hours. Ama unawekea kifaranga wako chakula kidogo, then wakimaliza unaongezea, rather than kuwekea chakula nyingi, the feed gets stale. Basically, it reduces palatability. So, and always ensure high levels of biosecurity. Have a foot bath. Ensure that you had done your post clean down well, and at least you had a break period of around 10 days from when you disinfected the house and when you're placing your birds. So these are a few images of what you could observe or some of the causes of chick mortality. So this is brooder pneumonia, mainly caused by what we call, it's a fungus, aspergillus, coming from maybe the wood shavings. It's very common with the sawdust litter, especially wakati ambao haijakauka vizuri. Or probably you bought it from a roadside, there's a lot of dust that has come and settled on top of your litter material. You will always observe whitish or creamy nodules in the lungs and the air sacs. So you usually observe a very high chick mortality kwa sababu ya brooder pneumonia. Also what we call a helicopter chick. This we always observe in our birds. Very poor feathering, weak birds. The birds are going, the droppings are not very well digested. That is why we call malabsorption syndrome, because the birds are unable to digest feed. Ranting and stunting. Ranting ni kifaranga amegrow but imefika mahali amewacha kukua kabisa, so amesimamia tu pale pale. Stunted growth ni ile there is some progression in growth but very slow and very minimal. So the bird will remain at maybe 100 grams mpaka afikisha wiki 5. So these are usually caused by some viruses because of a weak post clean down process. Omphalitis, I'm sure hii wakulima wengi tunaielewa. An umbilical infection, ile ambayo most people refer to as ugonjwa ya hatchery infection. Yeah. So it brings septicemia and death. So it could not necessarily be coming from the hatchery, but due to the conditions ambazo we had outlined earlier. Maybe some brooding lapses, poverty in plenty, dehydration, drought coming into the house, kuku kupata njaa. Yeah. Always provide an antibiotic under a vet prescription or advice. Salmonella infections, very risky, which cause very high mortalities of birds. And finally, last but not least, mycoplasma infections. So you can see there's a number of infections that cause ECM. And this is why we always advise our clients not to self-diagnose chicks and just buy any antibiotic at the farm, at the agro vets or at the shops. Always ensure you have a vet directing you so that you can be able to know what is the actual cause of your chick mortality. Ndio iwache kuwa tu ni shida ya hatchery. We call it shida ya hatchery, which all clients are able to diagnose, but what could be the actual problem ya shida ya hatchery? It could not be shida ya hatchery, inaweza kuwa shida ilikuwa kwa simply your wood shavings had an issue. So just sorting the wood shavings, understanding how the wood shavings could bring an issue to your farm would really save your next flock from a very high chick mortality. Understanding that having this type of birds is an issue to do with how you clean your house. Yeah, did you dry clean? Did you wet clean with soap and water? Did you rinse the soap and water? What disinfectant did you use? What was the ratio when you're doing the dilution? Did you use a pump that has pressure to spray your poultry house? Did you clean your gunny bags? Yeah, hizi the curtains ambazo sisi weka huku kando. Yeah, so this could be also another cause of chick mortality and eventually very poor growth for your birds. Chicks unable to access feed and water. Stressed chicks are unable to reabsorb the yolk reserve, and definitely if they're unable to absorb this yolk reserve, then kuku the first route of infection ambayo kuku anaanza kupata is either through the umbilical cord ama kitu yote ambayo anakula. So it could be that this bird had a progressive omphalitis case from the management lapses at your farm. Salmonella infections, ensure you are always in a contact with a vet who can be able to diagnose this particular kind of infections and advise you accordingly on how to manage a case like a salmonella infection. It is of public health concern because of passing over to the human world. Mycoplasma, KENCHIC really has 100% control over mycoplasma kuku kungorota, especially coming from a vertical perspective, that is directly from the breeder farms. Otherwise, we also have a horizontal transmission by asymptomatic carriers, personnel, equipments, animals, just having rodents around the farm. Always ensure that you're baiting, you have bait stations, your dogs are far away from where you have your poultry unit. Wild birds, ensure you don't have trees, the branches where the birds come to perch from, and local airborne droplets, especially from probably your area has the concentration of poultry rearing is quite high. You might find yourself with the issue of mycoplasma. But basically, good biosecurity, good sighting of your house, always ensure you have a footbath. Not every visitor that comes to your home is welcome to the side where you're doing your poultry rearing. The very first indicator of early chick mortality is unthriftiness, kifaranga ambayo wanakaa wadhaifu, and probably the pest advance. Utaanza kurealize that kifaranga wako ukiwaangalia huku nyuma, the droppings zimepest huku nyuma, ama kifaranga wako wanashindwa kupitisha choo, what we call constipation. soiled area around the vents, protrusion of the vent. Protrusion kwa sababu huyu kifaranga anajaribu kusukuma ile choo itoke, lakini since the dropping coming out is a bit sticky, it blocks the vent, so ile uchafu haiwezi toka. So mainly caused by incorrect brooding temperatures. Mara nyingine joto iko juu, imagine coming from 33 degrees acceptable to the bird all the way to room temperature. That's a very huge variation, especially when you're using the GCOS. So always ensure that you have optimum, consistent brooding temperatures at a short range. Maybe if you're using a brooder GCO, you might be unable to hit the consistent 33, 32 degrees for the first week. But at least ensure that that variation is not that huge, na kifaranga wako wanapata joto kila wakati, especially wakati masaa ya usiku and during the day when we hear our clients saying that it is sunny, kuna joto nyingi nje, so you assume that kifaranga wako pia kona joto ya kutosha. Mind you, when uko nje the temperature is around 33 from the weather forecast report, probably ndani ya kifaranga wako the temperature is 25. It is very easy to notice that from kuguza mguu, wekelea the cheek legs on your cheeks and feel whether they are warm or cold. Kama wana miguu baridi, then you realize you're chilling your birds. Identify what is causing the issue, what is triggering the issue, correct using your vet, na utaweza kusaidika. So there is, when you have chick mortality, sometimes it is spiking. So how do you control spiking mortality at kifaranga? Maybe you are collecting a chick, 2 chicks, then all of a sudden you realize kifaranga wako, you have 10 or 15. Basically, the mortality is rising steadily. So this is mainly because of low blood glucose levels. Kifaranga pia kona science yake. Which might trigger what we call the non-specific early mortality problems. Non-specific because normally they are not meant to cause chick mortality. Something like a slight lasping temperature regulation. Maybe 1 or 2 hours ulitoka nje umeenda kuwasha jiko. By the time you're coming back, yes, your chicks were not huddling, but you realize by the next 7-6 hours, mortality imepanda, mainly because of the low levels of blood glucose. The stress load basically increases and the demand for glucose increases as well. So what should you do when you notice this kind of mortality? As you engage your vet, just have some glucose. Yeah, glucose has some ready energy for the birds. The chicks that are not able to feed, the chicks that are severely dehydrated, the chicks that are basically unthrift. Itaweza kuwapatia hiyo nguvu ya kuweza kustahimili the low glucose levels, wataweza kustahimili the stress load before your vet advises on the next course of action. So don't mind the third point, it's a bit of science, but basically that's the explanation. So always provide your chicks with adequate comfort zone for optimal growth. As a huge percentage of energy priority supports the immune function, and especially during the first week. The first week you're building the immunity of your birds. During the first week, you're really the bird is developing the major key organs that are always growing at a ratio of 4:1 compared to the outer organs. So the first week is quite important for your chicks. So that was my presentation. Maybe we can hear a few pointers because I see we still have about 30 minutes on one of our clients' perspective of brooding. What is your perspective of brooding? Because probably your perspective of brooding is what is causing your early chick mortality. or from your perspective of brooding, you've realized what sometimes causes spike in mortality and what you are calling an ECM, the early chick mortality for your farm. So
Patrick,
just
I've got a
unmute.
presentation. I've got some
Sorry.
presentation on just on heat stress.
Okay.
I hope you're able to see it on the screen.
Yeah, it's quite clear.
Okay, thank you so much for taking us through. To introduce myself again, my name is Daniel Muraria. I'm a technical advisor, poultry section, working for Unga Farm Care. So then in today's topic on early chick mortality, as Patrick has clearly said, we find that most farmers have what we call heat stress in chicks. And so then I want just to go into depth a bit on how this thing comes about and possibly things we're able to do as a farm just to take care of heat stress in the chicks. To start, basically just what Patrick has said. I know some of you who have joined us in our previous presentations, we have gone through this slide, that when a chick has been hatched, day 0 to day 4, its internal body temperature is 0.6 degrees Celsius. So after day 5 onwards, the internal body temperature of that chick rises between 41 to 42 degrees. So in the first 4 days after the chick has been hatched, if the temperature goes beyond 46, that is called heat stress. And this heat stress, what it means is that you'll be able to see some chicks trying to spread their wings, trying, as a way of trying to cool off their bodies. We know that chicks don't sweat, so then the only way they're able to cool themselves is either by panting, and when they pant, they lose moisture, or by behaviors like spreading their wings. And then, as well, as you can see from these photos, they can as well, you'll see their behavior of moving far away from the heat source. So then when you find the chicks are quite away from the heat source, just a little bit high. When chicks start to pant, it brings another complication, because when they pant, they lose moisture. So then if they do that for a longer time, they are going to become dehydrated. And when their body becomes dehydrated, then they are not going to feed. And of course, this can even lead to much more early chick mortality, as Patrick has taken us through. So the opposite is true. When the same chicks don't get enough heat, so then the environment is very cold. Again, you can see a certain behavior that they are going to either to come closer to the heat source, or they're going to come and gather themselves and huddle together. But in this scenario as well, they are not going to feed, and as well they're not going to drink water, definitely impacting on their health. This slide, we have shared it before in terms of our recommended temperatures. The top part is for the broilers birds, and then for the lower chart is for the layers. So what most farmers do is what we call spot brooding, as opposed to whole house brooding. So then you find most farmers have a circle structure, and then there's a heat source at the center, like this picture on the left depicts. So then where you measure the temperatures, you can either measure the temperatures between this location A, that is way just directly below the brooding, the heat source, or you can measure the temperature 2 meters away from the heat source. So for both brooding just below the direct heat source and 2 meters away, the temperatures are there for the layer bird, and then it's an average for the broiler bird in terms of the expected temperatures of the house. So this as well can be shared to you so that you are on point if you're going to use a thermometer in your house. Now, when we go through this chart, this one just gives you a pictorial view of what happens in a brooder. So when you don't have a thermometer, or the thermometer you are using is not working correctly, or the thermometer readings are not based on the humidity readings of the house, you can have two scenarios. You can either have high brooding temperatures where we are going to have excess heat, or we can have low temperatures where the birds are going to be chilled. So basic chick behaviors that you're going to see in your brooder will be panting, as I'd said before. You're going to find that the chicks have reduced activity. So usually chicks are very active. So then when you realize that these chicks are not active, it tells you there's something wrong. A typical behavior you can find is that they'll huddle near air inlets or where the source of the heat is. I had mentioned you can find them spreading wings, but peculiar behavior when you see in your chicks, when they start pecking each other, it tells you there's something wrong. When these chick behaviors goes for long, there are some of the things that is going to impact your chicks. One, they are going to reduce their feed intake. Two, they are going to lose moisture. I've mentioned this in terms of when they pant. Three, and clearly Patrick has taken us through, you're going to have incidences of pasted vents. Four, this is going to happen internally in the chick. You're going to have impaired body functions. So these are things maybe you will not be able to see with your eyes, but you're going to see that the chicks now are succumbing to death. So what now you're calling early chick mortality. So when we're having chick which have not died, so we're assuming maybe we are still at the level of impaired body functions. So most of these chicks either are going to be dehydrated or they're going to be starved because they're not feeding. So what are the outcomes of this? One, we are going to have low, it means you're going to have poor growth rates in your birds. Low immunity, and because they have not fed correctly, they have not drunk water correctly, so their body are prone to any form of infection. And so then this leads to any opportunistic diseases that are going to attack your chicks. Definitely, because you are in agribusiness, you're going to have high cost of production. So then, as in a summary, what you're telling you about this is a trend of poor brooding, poor heat management in chicks. So then I just had wanted to bring this clearly so that as farmers, you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for taking us through that particular session. It marries well with what we are discussing today. Um, I had posed a question to one farmer who can give us his or her perspective of how he or she does brooding, and probably the few factors that he or she has observed that could change her or his causes of early chick mortality. So just unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us a bit of how you do your brooding. Share your experience with us. Kindly just feel free to express yourself. There will be no judging, tunasaidiana.
Hello.
Yes, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yes.
I'm Wanja, I'm in Nyeri.
Karibu
And
sana Wanja.
Asante. The kind of brooding that we've been doing is what Daniel has just put up about spot
Yes.
brooding. We've
Yes.
been using bulbs and
Okay.
also a jiko. You know those jiko with a base.
Yes.
Now we do notice at times they huddle together, and when it gets so hot, they kind of move further from the particular heat source.
Okay.
Now we have had a challenge between when you bring there's a time we were using these infrared bulbs. When you go close to the chicken, like lower them,
Yes.
times we were experiencing like there's a batch that we had that we experienced a lot of mortality, and
Okay.
then adjusting it upwards. So at first we did not know what was ailing, so we thought it's a disease. Then we came to
Yes.
realize also an issue of carbon, I think carbon monoxide or something, before
Okay.
we could be able to change
Yes.
that. So readjusting it. So we readjust it. We put it about a meter's height. That is what with the infrared. But then now with the charcoal stove, we have not had a lot of problems with it. However, we also use uh, because we do some hatching, a little hatching at our farm. We
Okay.
use tungi, hot water,
Yes.
and then we wrap it with a blanket. So
Okay.
when we do that, actually there is less mortality. That
Yes.
happens especially when we have blackouts. So it's our
Okay.
fallback.
That's
Um,
quite ingenious.
yes. It kind of feels it's as though it's their mom. They're feeling as though it's their mom.
I
So
get the
like
idea.
today we did receive some chicken. And
Okay.
what Dan was just mentioning, I think I can identify with that, because
Mm-hmm.
some of them are active. Like if I'm looking at them right now, you see them as though when you get into a room with rats. So they are so active.
Yes.
I think these are different batch. So I think I'll be now observing those particular things, issues that relate to heat, the heating
Yes.
part, probably get a thermometer and a humidity meter.
Very sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Wanja, for your contribution. Asante sana. I would like to. I have noted maybe two things from your perspective of brooding, and one being incorrect temperature ranges, kwa sababu unasema sometimes you find them handling, sometimes you find them running away from the source of heat, which really affect the chick behavior and definitely the rate at which the birds are feeding as well as watering. And probably you could find yourself with a spike in mortality because of low blood glucose levels, because of the increase in stress. So how you could maybe manage your particular issue is I would prefer instead of using the point heat, the using of the UV bulbs, because
Yeah.
the UV bulbs don't radiate heat all across the room evenly compared to how a Jiko usually operates. So I would suggest use. How many birds do you keep?
Um,
Or hatch in a
I
moment.
have I have 3,000 at present. Like the
Okay.
big ones, and
Yes.
in stages.
Yes.
Today I received day olds 800 of them,
Yes.
and then every 10 days we hatch about 200
Yes.
in different buildings. So
Yes.
the ones that we hatch are kienyeji,
Yes.
and then these others are now the KENCHIC one layers. So
Okay.
specifically with 2 layers. So
Yes.
most of them are in the cage system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I would like to suggest more use of the brooder geckos. However, there have been use of brooder geckos is becoming outdated. It's not environmental friendly. Produces a lot of carbon. You are also not able to really control the temperature range clearly. And I would suggest you adopt the use of gas brooders more, since your scale is quite huge, 3,000 broilers. That's a good number, and you also save your
Not
cost,
broilers, but layers.
your layers. Yeah,
Yeah, layers.
that's quite fine. That's okay. I
Yeah.
think either a brooder jiko or a gas burner will be sufficient instead of using the UV bulb.
I was actually thinking of incorporating that because we do have biogas at the farm. So we were thinking of
Fantastic.
incorporating the
Yes.
gas.
Okay. Asante sana for your contribution. Daniel, maybe if you have something to add
Yeah,
before we take
yes.
the questions raised.
Now, I think I don't have any other thing to add. I think you're very clear. Maybe they need Wanja needs to check out on better heat management. You're able to buy a digital thermometer that is combined with a hygrometer, so that you're able to monitor both your temperatures and your humidity, relative humidity in your place. So then just invest in that. So I think, Patrick, because of time, let's just go through the questions.
Yes,
I'll
sure.
start by first one. Jane has asked, with using the feeding trays, how often should we change the feeds in the trays so that we stop wastage, and how much needs to be put in the trays? So then Jane here is asking about, you brought in the chicks. So then how often should you put feeds on the trays, and how much of it? Because I think possibly Jane has experienced a bit of wastage. So then Patrick, I can answer that. I think I'm able to answer this.
Okay.
All right. So then, Jen, when chicks come in your farm, when they are day-old chicks, they don't know what is a feed. So then, the best thing to do is to actually provide them with either feeding trays or what we call chick paper. So then, chick paper, basically it is a paper where you just pour the feed for them to be able to feed from there. Now, there is usually an allocation that is given. So usually, if it is a broiler chick, usually say when the chicks come, you just allocate roughly between 60 to 65 grams per chick. So when they arrive, like you multiply 60 or 65 grams per chick, you make sure that that feed is there. So then that is the allocation. So to answer you on how often, I'd recommend as often as possible. So then when chicks comes, just like a baby, you'd want it to access very fresh feeds at any given time so that they can be able to have a higher feed intake. So what we do is that you don't pour a lot of feed. You just pour a little, then they finish, and then you constantly add, making sure that these chicks are feeding. In addition to that, there's what we call a crop field check that you do when the chicks have arrived. I might not be able to demonstrate it to you here, but when chicks comes, you can actually simply press their crop to just check whether they are drinking water or they are taking the feed. This one with any of our technical team, either KENCHIC or Unga Farm Care, we're able to just visit you and just show you practically on how you check 6 hours after the chicks have come, 12 hours after the chicks have come, 18 hours after the chicks have come, and 24 hours after the chicks have been placed in your farm. So I think that answers you correctly. So then the intention here that the chicks at any given point are able to get the feed and as fresh as possible. So don't pour a lot of feed. Just put a little and add constantly. So then we'll go to question number 2. Patrick, I think maybe this one you can handle. Jane still asks, does the use of liquid paraffin stop the pasted vents?
No, because you have not sorted what is causing the the pasted vents. Ideally, your birds will paste the vents mostly. Remember, we have said when there's an issue on temperature, when there's an issue on temperature regulation, that is when you'll observe a lot of pasted vents on your birds. So I would suggest you give them warm water. Adjust your temperatures to a level acceptable to the bird. Introduce some glucose, and your birds are good to go. So I would not really advocate use of liquid paraffin from a day-old chick, because actually it never sorts the issue on pasted vents. Temperature regulation is the key source of or the key cause of pasted vents.
Thank you, Patrick. We go to question from Millicent. She's asking, my chicks have died due to EC muere. I'm not so sure what is EC muere. I guess, I don't know whether, Millicent, you want to mean E. coli. I don't know, maybe clarify. And then she continues to ask, gasping for air, then die. What could be the cause? So, Millicent, if you can just unmute and ask the question so that it can be a bit clearer. Millicent, if you're there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so then just ask your question so that it becomes a bit clearer.
I was asking.
Sorry, Millicent, we can't hear you.
I've just unmuted. Can you now hear me?
Yes, now you're clear.
My chicks are about 1 week old, but for the last 3 or 4 days, I've been using 2 to 3 chicks per day. And they've been gasping for air, then they. So I was just wondering what could have heard about it. So I don't know either of the tension could be the cause, maybe the temperature.
Patrick,
Yes,
do
I can
you
add
have
on
an
that,
opinion
Daniel.
on this?
Yes, I
All
do.
right, okay.
Thank you, Millicent, for your question. And maybe checking from the just most recent presentation that Daniel has done for us, you realize your chicks are gasping for air when probably there is no enough quality air. Probably you've enclosed your brooder so much that the birds cannot have good, proper ventilation, basically. So we'll suggest you create minimum ventilation levels from top. Remember, you open your curtains from top so that at least you can have proper air circulation at the farm. However, I would still suggest that if you have a vet who services your farm, somebody from Unga, somebody from KENCHIC might probably visit your farm so that you can well ascertain that the cause of gasping for air is due to inadequate airflow inside your brooder, or maybe check whether the design of the brooder is okay and optimum for your birds.
Yeah. So then, Millicent, in addition to that, I think, well, there's a condition that can mimic such a behavior where chicks are able to gasp for air. So then again, as Patrick has clearly put it, so then let one of our technical teams come and visit you and confirm whether it's not a case of aspergillosis. So aspergillosis is a condition, it's a fungal kind of an infection that can really affect your parts. Mainly the culprit source is the litter. So if your litter is dusty and it has the fungal spores and it affects those chicks, what we have seen is that they usually behave like such. So then again, let a vet come and visit your farm and just ascertain whether it is something to do with ventilation, or it's something to do with aspergillosis, or is it, or whether it is any other condition. So then let's proceed on with questions. So then Johnson Olefa is asking, how can I identify original chick mash from Unga company? Johnson, just visit any of our appointed distributors and buy from the reputable sources. I'll go to Mary, who is asking, hi, duration for brooding. Patrick, maybe you can just quickly answer this.
Yes. Before 14 days, chicks are unable to regulate. The thermoregulation mechanism basically is not well developed. So I would advise a period between 14 to 21 days, depending with the weather conditions and your location.
Yeah, very true. So then if it is for broilers, as clearly put, usually we see that the broilers in most part of the country, they're able to undergo brooding in 14 days. Or no, in some cold weather, they can even go to 21 days. But I have visited like the coast regions and they do their brooding for just 7-10 days because the temperatures there are quite high. That is for the broilers bird. For the layer bird and kienyeji, because their weight gain is a bit slower, you might need more days for them to brood. So then you find in most areas you'll have to brood for like 28 days. But in warmer regions, you find that you just brood them for 21 days. So then it is here, not there. It depends with where you're doing your brooding, and especially the environmental temperatures have a direct impact in our open ventilated housings. So then just to go to the next question from Ian. Ian is asking, what is the advantage of using Unga feeds compared to other feeds such as Kitengela feeds? I had seen Dr. Baraza had joined us. So Dr. Baraza, kindly unmute and answer this question. What is the advantage of using Unga feeds compared to other feeds such as Kitengela feeds? Dr. Baraza? Dr. Baraza, kindly just unmute.
Typing then ECM.
Okay. So then, Ian, to answer you is that first of all, for you before you feed your birds have, I'm assuming you're a poultry farmer, so then poultry have specific nutrients that they require depending with their stage of growth. So then the advantage of using Unga feeds is because we have formulated diet that is specific for that poultry type and it's specific for the growth needs of that bird. I have no idea about Kindegela feeds. So then when you're using Unga, you're sure that that feed has been formulated correctly. For you to be able to compare between feeds from different companies, there are two approaches. The first approach is where you take a feed sample to the lab for analysis. The second approach, you can as well give the birds and they'll be able to tell you if the feed is performing or not. So then, so kindly just use Unga, and I know you're not going to regret it. So then, Titus Hayeka has raised his hand. So Titus, if you can just quickly shoot up your question before we close the session today. Titus? Okay, Titus has not unmuted himself. So then I think the last question for Mary about how about lighting? Should there be dark hours or there should be lighting throughout at night? So then we are going to tackle this topic some other day in terms of poultry light biology. And it will be very specific for broilers. It's going to be specific for layers. So then just keep on checking our WhatsApp groups on when next you're going to have the training. So we'll be able to tackle this topic in detail. So Mary, just be patient. We'll be able to tackle this in details. So then back to you, Patrick, to conclude. I think we short with time, 5 minutes down.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel, for the very good moderation of the session. Each and every one of you agripreneurs for joining us today. I know you're busy guys, you've had a long day, but thank you for giving us the audience for at least an hour. Let's make sure that you are protecting our loved ones. We are keeping safe. Wear your mask, wash your hands, sanitize. COVID is with us, it is real. Avoid being a statistic, as they say. So have a good night. If in case you have any more question, shoot it on our WhatsApp platform. We'll be able to engage it from there. So go and have your supper. Asanteni sana.